Welcome to the Boom Bap Kingdom. Yo, peace and welcome to the Boom Bap Kingdom. We're here and we're chilling. In this video, I kind of wanted to explain why I have not bought a new MPC. The MPC 1, the Live 2, MPC X, XSE, etc. I am not against MPC at all. But I've been using MPC for a very long time. So let's rewind. I started making beats on the Ensonic EPS, the keyboard EPS, the original. That was my first access to a sampler sequencer. Later on, literally like a few months later, I picked up the EPS M rack mount with a keyboard controller. So to put this in perspective, we're talking 1988, 1989. The limitation that I found on the EPS and the EPS M was literally drums. I'm not going to get into the details on how the EPS and the EPS-M worked. I used it extensively and I used it for years. But both units had a strong limitation when it came to drums. It did a lot of things great, but then it did other things not so well. For me, in the beginning on the EPS-M, and I had a lot of them. I had the EPS, I had the EPS-M, I had the 16 Plus, the 16 Plus Turbo. I used all of those. I stopped using Ensonic just before the ASR 10 and the ASR X was released. That's when I stopped, and I started to run into issues when I wanted to create my own drum patterns out of kicks and snares I could chop up. Prior to being able to do that, I was looping drums. So I was looping a lot of stuff, but again, this is 89 we're talking. So I was looping a lot of drum breaks. I was looping samples, stuff like that. I ended up getting my hands on an SP1200, and a friend of mine had an MPC 60. So I was at his crib and I saw what he was doing on an MPC 60. He wasn't quite really using it to its fullest capability, but he was still using it, and the workflow was a little different from what I was familiar with on Ensonic. I picked up the Ensonic, picked up a 1200, picked up an MPC 60. And as I was working with these things, I noticed that obviously some of these samplers could do things better than others. So certain features were very good on some and not so good on others. And in particular, because the Ensonic was my main weapon of choice in those days, I gravitated toward the MPC 60 initially just for drums. I was using the SP1200, but the 60 had more sample time and it had a better workflow, in my opinion. Eventually, the 60 became my main weapon of choice once I got past just using it for drums. I started chopping up other samples and stuff like that, and eventually I picked up a Yamaha synthesizer, and I was using that for bass lines. I would MIDI that to the MPC 60, and then that setup became my main workflow. And we're probably talking around 1997 now. So I've been using the 60 extensively for almost 10 years. I eventually gravitated away from Ensonic and the SP1200, and that was really due to workflow, not necessarily sonics and sound and things of that nature. Because keep in mind, back in those days, no one was really thinking about, the 12-bit grimy, the artifacts. We just had what we had access to and we used it. That's pretty much it. When you go back in time and you listen to the music from that era, the hip hop or the house from that era, compared to say 10 years afterward on modern equipment, that's when you began to notice the sonics. But for me, this was primarily workflow and capability. Now, what MPC didn't have in those days was the low pass filters that you got from the Ensonic and the SP1200. Those filters were insane. Filters in your beats really helped a lot for low end. If you were making changes, you could do full on pattern changes with your loop running through the low pass filter. Eventually, I got my hands on an MPC 4000, and this is after using the MPC Studio extensively. So I migrated from the 60 to MPC Studio, but really wanted to be back on standalone. I started using MPC Studio. I really didn't care for it. I didn't care for the, controller USB to laptop feel. It wasn't my thing. Picked up an MPC 4000, fell in love with that workflow, fell in love with the effects, etc. Eventually, because of the general limitation of the 16 pads, things of that nature, I was hearing things in my head I couldn't quite do, even on the 4000. And Akai released the Force. I didn't pick up a Force until the 2.0 firmware release. That's when I picked up a Force. And I fell in love with that workflow. However, before picking up the Force, I kind of made a decision that I wanted to try things outside of Akai. And I picked up a Roland MC707. I worked with that for a little while. Sounded fantastic. Workflow, super trash for me. The sound is amazing. Workflow, I just couldn't wrap my head around the workflow. So I went from MPC 60, bought the 4000, fell in love with that, still use it till this day. It's right behind me. And then decided to branch out from Akai, picked up the 707, sounded amazing, didn't like the workflow. Then I picked up that MV8800. That's right behind me in the corner. And I fell in love with the sonics, the workflow, the effects. And I said, wow, okay, this is dope. And then after that, I picked up the Akai Force. Getting away from MPC, it opened up other avenues for me. And especially being on the Force with the 64 pads, that really opened up a different level of production for me. Your typical 16 pad chopping up, boom bap type of stuff, I could always revert to that. But as I started to gravitate to other machines, I was able to do other things because other machines take a different approach. After the Force, I was open to other devices. I picked up the Octatrack Arc 2 Polyend Tracker Plus. Between the Force and the Polyend Tracker Plus and that grid layout on the pads, the clip-based flow for the Force, the tracker sequencing workflow on Tracker Plus, this began to open up my mind and make me think, wow, you can get more detailed, more granular on these different sequencer types than you can on MPC. So there's nothing wrong with MPC. It's just, for me, I think Force in particular opened my mind up to a different workflow. That 64 pad layout. The Tracker Plus does not have 64 pads, it has 48, but it's still in that same vein. So for me, when I look at things like the Force, Tracker Plus, the Deluge, Push 3, that's where my mind gravitates, because in my mind, and really based on experience and workflow, those samplers really fall into the realm of instruments, whereas MPC, Machine Plus, in some cases are really sampler, sequencer, groovebox genre, whereas Force, Tracker Plus, Push 3, that falls into the realm of instrument. And I was hearing things in my head that I really couldn't get done on MPC, but could get done in this Force Tracker Plus world with the extra pads, etc., etc. I just wanted to give you guys some kind of, some background of why I don't use MPC, where I started. Get in those comments. Let me know what you think. If MPC is the standard for you and you have no intention on leaving that platform, if that is your go-to and you swear by it, get in those comments and let me know why that is. If you're thinking about trying something new, let me know what that is. I would love to hear your guys' comments on what you're currently using and why, and if you're thinking or considering adding a different brand into your workflow. With that being said, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend to tell a friend, and I'm going to leave you with a BBK salute. Peace.